Welcome back, everyone, to Progressively Incorrect. I am your host, Zach Groeschel, and I am here to talk with two amazing educators, Linda Diamond and Paige Pullen, all about this current project that they're working on to bring more understanding and knowledge around the science of reading, more specifically around the science of literacy and instruction. We're going to get right into that in just a moment. If you listen to the other episode on a previous season with Doug Carnine, this one is really a nice pairing. I'd go back and listen to that one and then check this one out as well. This episode's what's been on my mind recently. So thank you so much for following along and for acknowledging our sponsors, which is John Catt Educational, which publishes some of the best books in education. I'll post some links in the show notes for you to check out John Catt's catalog and get yourself started on the science of learning and evidence-based instruction. Linda, Paige, it's so great to have you on the show. Linda, how about you start by introducing yourself?
Thank you, Zach. I'm Linda Diamond. I'm a longtime educator. I was a high school English teacher who taught corrective reading, decoding, and comprehension. I was a DI teacher trained by Siegfried Engelmann. And after I was done teaching, I went into school administration. Then I went into education policy research and ultimately started an organization, Core Learning, that focused on professional development around literacy and math and implementation. Retired and went to work immediately upon retirement and launched with Doug Carnine, Reed Lyon, and Kelly Butler, the Evidence Advocacy Center. And also, I'm the author of the Teaching Reading Sourcebook, which is used in many colleges of ed for educator preparation programs.
Awesome. You're a legend. I'm just so happy to have you on the show. Thank you for taking your time to be here. Paige, how about you introduce yourself?
Hi, Zach. Thank you. I'm Paige Pullen, and my background is in some ways similar to Linda's, and then we kind of diverge in a couple of ways, and now our paths have crossed again, which I'm really excited about. I was a classroom teacher for 12 years, and the interesting thing about my story is that I, unlike Linda, didn't have access to DI programs. And so I was in the general education classroom, was then asked to teach in a Title I classroom, and suddenly discovered that, guess what? I didn't know how to teach reading. I embarked on a journey, and for the last 20 something years, have still been trying to figure that out. So I went back to school into the doctoral program in special education. And so what I have been doing after my classroom experience, I was at the University of Virginia for 16 years, where I taught in special education and built a cohesive program of literacy and reading methods courses for students, pre-service teachers who would be teaching special education. Then I left that job about 9 years ago and was asked to return to my alma mater, the University of Florida, where I developed a series of literacy professional development programs for the state of Florida through the Lastinger Center for Learning, which is a center at the University of Florida. And for 8 years, we worked and developed a system-wide program across the state of Florida to focus on the Literacy Matrix, which is a program that endorses teachers in reading, and micro-credential serving over 40,000 teachers. I've since left the University of Florida and am now partnering with Linda and the Evidence Advocacy Center and working on something really exciting called the Canon of Literacy. And hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about that today.
Love it. Well, I'm excited to unpack some of the kind of I'm big into what's going on with the science of reading and seeing, how it's invigorated and excited a lot of different school districts that I work with. Of course, there are always some growing pains, or there's some blind spots, I guess you could say. And I think you're here maybe to bring those to light as we think about next steps and making sure that all schools provide, a rich curriculum for kids in literacy. Let's start here. What are you seeing or experiencing in schools that made you think we need to sort of shift how we're talking about literacy and instruction and and curriculum when it comes to literacy. Maybe we'll start with you, Linda.
What I see is this mystifying to me idea that the science of reading is the science of reading instruction, and it's not. And Dr. Sharon Vaughn often says that. It's not the same. And while educators have learned a lot about all the components that the science of reading research has told us, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, I still don't see that they really understand how best to teach those components. I'm not seeing practices in particularly how instruction is delivered. I'm not seeing materials that have baked in designs that take into account what we do know from effective instruction. Um, Particularly when I think about Siegfried Engelmann's opus, his theory of instruction, we have so much knowledge about what good teaching should look like, but I'm not necessarily seeing that, and I'm not blaming teachers. I don't think they've learned about it. I don't see higher education preparing teachers to understand both effective instruction nor cognitive science, cognitive research, how people learn and how best to teach. So I think that's what I worry about, that we're not necessarily having the practices and the understanding of learning to really make a science of literacy. And I like to use literacy because I think about writing, speaking, language, all the components. And I fear that we're not going to get the biggest bang for our bucks unless we unite these three sciences, which Paige can certainly talk about.
Thank you, Linda. I'm happy to talk about that, and you're right. So Linda and I agree fully on this. And one of the things that we want to do in this canon that I'm writing now is to broaden the conversation, as Linda was talking about, from the science of reading to really about literacy, because it is, as Linda said, much more than just phonics instruction, which is one of the things that we're hearing a lot. We're seeing a lot of focus on foundational skills. The other thing that we're missing is this idea of what I call the three sciences framework. And that's a piece of the canon. And the three sciences framework came out of my experience seeing gaps in how schools approach literacy. We often silo research instead of connecting it. Learning science answers an important question. How do humans acquire and store knowledge? And what helps it stick in long-term memory? That's what learning science is, and that comes out of multiple fields, including cognitive science. That directly influences how we teach, which leads us to instructional science. Instructional science then answers the question, how do we design lessons, feedback, and practice opportunities so learning actually takes place? And then that in turn brings us to the third science, which is literacy science. What are the developmental steps of becoming literate? What are the evidence-based components? We've basically been talking about the third and only the third and really narrowing it to not literacy broadly, but just to reading. And each of these sciences is powerful alone, but when we combine them, we get a complete guide for educators. And it's the integration that's been what's missing in the conversations around the science of reading.
There's a great article by Zig Engelman talking about this analogy of the Dalmatian and its spots, right? I mean, Linda, sorry to put you on the spot, but I mean, am I on the right track here with like seeing that perhaps we're not seeing the forest for the trees, or we're equating certain components, which we could say spots, with effective programs, and that's the Dalmatian. Am I correct about that?
Yes, absolutely. We're missing the whole Dalmatian. And yeah, that you should post that. That is so good. And And I think this goes to one of my concerns also, because what do we as teachers use? We use materials. We rely on textbook publishers to give us the tools of our trade, just as physicians rely on the equipment, the scalpels, the sutures. So we rely on the publishers. The publishers, I think, are doing a pretty good job of taking the elements of what they know as the science of reading, packing them, overpacking, I would say, stuffing them into their materials, but omitting clarity of design and a clarity of guidance for delivery. Certainly insufficient practice, really insufficient spaced, cumulative, and retrieval practice. And they can be helpful. I think that's what we need. We need better tools. We need this knowledge that Paige is putting together. And then we need it all wrapped into how educators are prepared, pre-service educators, and then ongoing professional development to really benefit so teachers can really understand that you need all three of these sciences to really be effective.
It's hard to convince people of this because you often don't have programs in front of you. But the best case scenario, you sit and you open up these programs, a variety of different ones, and you actually flip through the pages rather than just looking at the first like table of contents and saying, "Oh, it's all here," right? You actually go through it and do a deep dive. Such There's such a problem there though with the group that's there looking at the materials and not seeing the same things as each other, not understanding the underlying design because it's almost invisible, right? I give the example in math where I say, well, I make a circle and I divide it into four parts and I say, okay, how many parts are in each hole and how many parts are shaded? And we teach the kid, and everyone sees that math lesson as being perfectly fine. And then I explain, well, you're asking the kid to then read a fraction that is 1/2 and 1/3, which is irregular. So you need to have a baked in track that would teach them how to say it. And oh, by the way, we shouldn't start with one circle. We should do two circles because one circle doesn't generalize to improper fractions, right? And then I explain and I explain. I go, do you see how the original lesson that you thought was good was missing this deeper content analysis that Zig figured out a long time ago, but that we're not applying to really fashionable and sexy looking materials, but that don't have this invisible design. How do we get out of that box that we've put ourselves in? How do we move forward with this? Maybe Paige, you have some thoughts about that.
You bring up some really good points, Zach. And what I can tell you is this. When I have looked at materials recently, and I've just actually been reviewing some HQIM, high quality instructional materials, and one of the things that I see is that they're very disconnected. You might have, this activity, and as Linda said, they're overpacked. You've got all these disparate things. Well, we're going to focus on vocabulary, and here's this vocabulary package. And we're going to focus on foundational skills, and here are these foundational skills. But there's no through line, there's no consistency across them. And there's no way for teachers to really understand how to implement them in a way that's going to change child outcomes. Nor is there a way to assess where you are doing ongoing progress monitoring and actually having those assessments inform what you're doing across the system. And so we have these programs that may, as Linda said, address those core elements. But when the National Reading Panel came out and looked at phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, they were never intended to be isolated skills. That was supposed to be, we had to study them that way because we had to do the meta-analyses. But what we need to do is put those in an integrated way. And then we need to make sure that in terms of explicit and systematic, we use that term in such a way that it's almost cliche. What does it mean to be explicit? What does it mean to be systematic? Well, if you're systematic, you know that instruction is building and that you have those prerequisite skills. So you're doing that task analysis as you just described with your math example. We're not seeing that in materials, and we really need to make sure that we're not just doing these siloed activities across these quote 5 pillars. We are actually thinking about integrated learning that addresses how individuals learn, what that means for what instruction looks like in terms of explicit systematic instruction with spaced practice and retrieval practice, and that we're also looking at the practices that actually have an evidence base, and that those are cohesively packaged in programs that provide ongoing support to teachers for how to implement in their classroom.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, Paige. And I think, Zach, you made an important point. Teachers and principals don't know how to look at their materials. So they wouldn't know what to look for. And I've just had a conversation recently with folks in the UK. They've done an awesome job of preparing teachers and bringing cognitive science into the UK. They also happen to be doing a much better job of teaching reading in the UK than we are. And until teachers and administrators understand what we know from learning science, what we know about effective instruction, they wouldn't know how to look. How would you know what to examine a curriculum for? How would publishers know what to design in to their curricula? So there's a lot of learning, and I think that this canon that Paige is developing with this three sciences framework is going to be a useful resource. My vision is, and this is why the Evidence Advocacy Center is supporting this development, is this should be mandatory reading in educator preparation when it's finished. It should be mandatory reading by textbook publishers so they can begin to see and understand. I would add, I'd want all textbook publishers to read Zieg's Theory of Instruction and Carl Hendricks and Paul Kirshner's 2 books in order to really begin to understand what's missing.
It seems to me that a lot of people, have seen a lot of positive gains, at least in the adoption of new phonics programs, or just the idea that, hey, let's have our literacy block be more structured. Let's align our practices so we can talk with each other in the same school. And that just seems like maybe that was good enough, I suppose, for some people. And this conversation might feel too early for those who've just been exposed to it. But I guess because I'm talking to two former kind of DI people, or sort of DI inspired people, there has to be a sense of urgency that we bring back into this work. We can't ever become complacent, I guess. So tell me a little bit more for those who've missed out on the Evidence Advocacy Center. We've mentioned that term a few times. What is the goal of this project, and where is it now? Considering I talked to Doug Carnine now several months ago. Maybe Linda, you can start.
Well, let's see. So, the goal of the Evidence Advocacy Center is to advocate for the professionalization of the entire field of education, from higher ed through policymakers, state departments, district schools, um, parent and family advocates understanding what that means, the whole system, more like other professions that are based on evidence. And that's what we want. We want to rely on evidence. The Evidence Advocacy Center has come a long way. We have resource menus that are applicable to policymakers, district schools, parent groups, higher ed. We have implementation science guides, which Paige will be heavily involved in supporting. But the centerpiece is this canon that Paige is developing for literacy. Eventually, we'll want one for math, and we're going to want one for behavior, because understanding both what we teach, how we teach, and how people learn is part of professionalizing education, a crucial part. And this, I think, will be the centerpiece of what the Evidence Advocacy Center puts together, gets out, communicates, and hopefully will start enabling the system. What we call our Evidence Advocacy Center website is a knowledge management system. So, what do knowledge management systems have? First of all, they have a base of knowledge. That's what Paige is creating. It's a base of knowledge, and they have to be accessible. And our Evidence Advocacy Center site is accessible. And they have to be continually updated and kept current. So we think the canons will be a centerpiece of this knowledge management system.
That's perfect. And Paige, you've talked about this kind of scientific knowledge being provisional. So how can you even do this work of putting this together if science is always evolving and things are there's always updates to what we know? Like, why even go down the route of documenting at all, I guess, would be the sort of the other side of that. Like, so how do you view this evolving and changing as the science kind of evolves itself?
That's a great question, Zach. And it's true that science is provisional. And so in the canon, I actually give an example of evidence and how evidence can change, and Popper's swan example, where it's like you can say all swans are white until you see one black swan, and then that disproves that all swans are white, right? So we know something until we don't know it anymore because we have new evidence. As teachers, as educators, we have to work from what we know now, but have a mindset that we are willing to change when new and convincing evidence comes to bear. The other piece that we talk about in terms of the science being provisional is this idea of what works for whom, under what conditions. And then the key here also is how can it be sustained over time? And that's where we look at translational science. We spend a lot of time talking about what evidence means, and evidence, we have randomized controlled trials, and that's the gold standard, and those are critical to building our evidence. But the piece that we are often missing is how do we translate that science into classroom practice and what works in different contexts. And so that's another piece that we're going to address in the canon, is looking at what does science mean broadly. The science of reading, there are things that we were doing years ago that I think about in my own classroom and was implementing incorrectly. And then I learn, and it's like, oh my goodness, I was doing it wrong. I need to shift my practice. But there's a lot we know that is right and will probably remain stable. But we have to have an open mind and be willing to shift our practices based on that new and convincing evidence.
Awesome. When I think about, the randomized controlled trials being, the gold standard, as you said, but then there's other forms of research that need to be thought about as well. I think about some of these big movements that have happened recently in states where they've seen lots of gains, are kind of a southern surge, if you will, right? They've seen lots of gains, but there's nothing controlled about this at all because they're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at this problem, and we can't know what is caught. Is it the third grade retention law, right? Is it that they restructured their instructional coaches? Is it the materials? Is it the training, right? We don't know what it is. Is there a way to incorporate sort of some of these recent sort of surges that have come out of successful states into this kind of knowledge base?
That's a really important question, and I do think we need to look at what are states doing that are successful. And you're right that we can't disaggregate all of those variables and determine what is causing this surge without doing uh, an in-depth study. Linda has done some work on this, so I'll toss it over to Linda in terms of what the EAC is thinking about in terms of using the data from states and what states are being successful and what they're doing. So, Linda, do you want to answer and talk about that?
Sure, sure. In fact, we've developed a term at the Evidence Advocacy Center calling it high performing educators. These are states or schools or districts or individual teachers that are consistently getting strong positive results, particularly with vulnerable populations. So, to figure out what is it they're doing. I mean, first of all, I think it's a combination of factors. I think it is going to be much of what states are putting into place, although I worry about implementation, whether implementation is really sustained and effective and thoughtful. In California, there was a study done, my goodness, I think it was in the 2000s, early 2000s, called Similar Students, Different Results. And it was a large study looking at schools all throughout California that had the similar demographics. And most of them had large pockets of poverty, multilingual learners, varied, diverse populations. But why were some of them getting such strong results? And what they found was really multiple factors. One, the material they were using. Two, the leadership and the involvement of the leadership. Three, the professional development practices. Four, ongoing coaching that was supporting not just learning, but also the materials that they had, helping teachers really implement. And there were other factors, but those were the main ones that they identified. A follow-up study was done in California. Similar English learner students, different results, found the same causes. So it's multiple causes. It's going to turn out to be knowledgeable educators who have had effective learning and professional development. It's going to turn out to be effective tools that are working, data use and understanding. I think building an MTSS system in is going to affect this, multiple tiered systems, multi-tiered systems of support. And it's going to be an ongoing support and coaching of educators. Now, the states that have passed the laws, if they've built all those components into an ongoing system, are likely to sustain their results. However, the if is a big if. And I fear, having lived through reading first and watched great results happen in some states, and then it disappeared. Doug talks about this all the time. The efforts that go away, I fear. And that's why I believe what Paige is doing is critical, because I think that if we don't include what is effective instruction and how learning happens, then we are going to see some of this go away. I mean, I give big credit to Louisiana and Mississippi, Alabama, like you said, it's a Southern surge, that are seeing results and are sustaining those results. Or look at Steubenville. Now, I'm going to pull out Steubenville for a minute because I know what Dr. Slavin was doing when he developed Success for All. He understood the sciences that Paige is talking about. It was designed in, just like DI. You'll see elements of DI in Success for All. It's very clear. He understood what instructional practices need to look like. He understood how learning happened. And the fact that Steubenville has been sustaining that is because they've seen the results over time of what happens when you have an effective instructional program. Look, why did the Bureau of Indian Education during Reading First have strong results, which they did? They were using direct instruction in most of their schools. Why are some of the schools bringing back direct instruction? Because it worked. And it has the elements that Paige is articulating in this canon.
It's interesting because when you say that, it requires a lot of coordinated pieces, right? Like I think we can think, well, if we can just have a ground, a bottom up kind of grassroots movement from teachers where we sort of, uh, dive into the research and we sort of self-police that will be enough. But no, you you need it at the leadership level, and before that, even you really need that in teacher prep programs, and all of these different constituencies sort of need to be pulled like kicking and screaming, kind of like how medicine was, towards a point where this becomes a true or a mature profession. It's not easy, and you sort of kind of get stuck. At least I do with like, where does the chicken and the egg begin, and where does it start? What's the easiest high leverage point to begin with? I guess as we kind of near the close here, what are your thoughts about how to play this sort of strategically, Paige, in the coming years?
I think one thing, Zach, that we need to do is think about the education ecosystem. We talk a lot about educators and what educators know or don't know through no fault of their own. We need to think about the entire ecosystem. District level personnel are making decisions about high quality instructional materials. They're choosing the materials. They need to have the professional learning and the understanding of this three sciences framework. You go down to the next tier, building level administrators. Building level administrators are supporting the literacy ecosystem in their school. And so they need to have this knowledge of how individuals learn, what instruction is effective, and what literacy instruction should look like in a school. And then moving down to coaches, teachers, and paraprofessionals. We need to address the whole ecosystem. We also need to build capacity because, as Linda said, legislation comes and goes. We had No Child Left Behind and Reading First, and we were making progress, and then that goes away. But if we have the education profession across the ecosystem understand teaching and learning and understand what it takes to improve child outcomes, that's something you can't take away. So we need to build those knowledge, skills, and abilities around the three sciences framework so that when these conversations come and go and shift and the pendulum swings, we stay the course. We stay the course to what we know works. We know how humans learn. We know what instruction is effective because of that learning science, and we know how we should teach it and what we should teach in schools. So I think bringing those together, thinking about the ecosystem, creating a knowledge base that is going to build capacity and stay long after we're gone.
And I would add, if I had to pick one place that started this, I would have to say the conversations around the science of reading have been absolutely vital. They have initiated this. I give organizations like the Reading League huge credit for spreading the understanding of what is the science of reading. And they've never said it's just phonics, but that's the misunderstanding that people have had. So without the National Reading Panel report, without groups like the Reading League, without the folks that have been pushing on the science of reading, I don't think we'd be in a place to do what Paige is doing. I think that was a necessary but not sufficient step. And bringing it now together with what we know about learning and therefore what we know about how to teach is going to sort of tie a bow around it and pull it all together. And I will say the Reading League is constantly updating as well and adding to their curriculum evaluation guidance tool that is used to evaluate instruction. And they're adding design and delivery because as we're learning, I think, and this goes to what Paige said about science, we keep learning. So we need to enhance what we're doing and continue to improve.
Love it. Well, let me go with this kind of fun question to end the end our talk, which has been a blast, by the way. I've just I know that my listeners are gonna like spread this around. This is just what a lot of people have been asking for. Here's the question. If a school leader asked you, what's one thing I should start doing differently tomorrow to support stronger literacy instruction, how would you answer? Paige, over to you.
If a leader asked me one thing I should do differently would be to implement a high quality instructional framework in the school. Can my answer be multi-parted? Implement that program, but provide support to educators, ongoing professional learning that is job embedded, and get away from one and done professional learning activities that are focused on an individual strategy, but identify a high quality instructional program and provide implementation support that is across the school.
Love it, love it, love it. It gets to what I've been talking about recently as well, right? I just the kind of the song and dance PD or the single keynote address, or even just you got the you're in service at the beginning, but we've got to create that immersion or that ecosystem type model in which all the pieces are coordinating together, and the teachers know how to use these materials to really drive like student performance. Linda, over to you.
Well, I don't know that everyone's going to appreciate this answer, but I would say to a building principal, get a direct instruction curriculum, send your teachers up to Eugene, get them prepared to teach it, because the beauty of a direct instruction program material is it's educative. You learn. I was a high school English teacher. I had no idea how to teach reading. It wasn't until I had corrective reading, decoding, and comprehension for my students who were reading at third grade level, and until I went to Eugene, that it taught me not only how to teach reading, but I took the same principles into when I was teaching history, when I was teaching other content areas.
Love it. Love it. Check out some of the videos that I recorded at the conference in Eugene talking to educators. I definitely also recommend you check it out and contact Nifty to like learn about like that conference and their support. It's just fantastic. Linda and Paige, you have been great guests on this podcast. I'm so looking forward to supporting the this project, the Canon, and the Evidence Advocacy Center, the EAC, that we've been talking about in the future. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Progressively Incorrect. I'm going to keep on churning out new episodes of this. This is season 5 somehow. It just feels like it was yesterday we started this show. Thank you so much for your support, and Linda and Paige, take care.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.